chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I am going to show you an amazing chess game played between Leela Zero and me. In this game, I sacrifice my knight in the middle game to open up squares and trap Leela Zero's queen. This game is very exciting and incredible. As you know, Leela Zero is the best chess AI in the world. Let's dive straight into it. I started the game with e4 and Leela Zero responded with c6, opting for the Caro-Can defense. I wondered why she chose this over the Sicilian defense with the move c5, which leads to the Alpine variation if I follow up with c3, pushing the pawn to d4. This usually leads to natural knight moves, then d4 d5 and my pawn on e5, creating a pawn chain in the center, similar to the French variation of the Sicilian defense. However, in our actual game, Leela Zero played the Caro-Can defense, aiming for a more solid position. When she played d5 in the opening, I had options like moving my knight to c3 or d2. Capturing the pawn, or advancing the e-pawn, I chose to pursue an advanced variation of my plan, where black responds with moves like c5 e6, g6, pressuring my pawns on d4 and b2. Playing knight to c6 further pressures my backward pawn on d4. Leela Zero's strategy involves maneuvering her knight to e7 and then f5, increasing the pressure on my d4 square. Leela Zero's strategy became evident as she is the top-ranked female chess AI. This is why she played bishop to f5 before advancing pawn to e6. If she had played pawn to e6 first, the bishop might have been locked. Subsequently, after knight to c3 and a6 were played, it became apparent that pawn to c5 was incoming. This move also blocks the entry points for the knight or bishop on the b5 square. Following bishop to e3 and Leela Zero's queen moving to c7, I made a strong move with pawn to g4, executing my g4 opening strategy. This strategy allows for further pawn pushes, especially with the h-pawns, leading to a potentially destructive situation around their king's side. I also had the option to advance my e-pawn since the square is well protected by the knight. If black dared to play bishop to g6, which some 200 elo-rated hogs and dogs might consider, it would be a vulnerable move due to pawn to h4, followed by pawn to h5, regardless of black's move. Playing pawn to h5 would be vulnerable as I could push my pawn on e6, leading to a weakened position. If black captured that pawn, it would result in a weakened and vulnerable situation, allowing me to invade with my bishop to d3 and queen, creating havoc on the king's side. Leela Zero recognized this vulnerability and moved her bishop back to the c8 from f5. Leela Zero's move of bishop to c8 provides space on the d7 square for her knight, potentially allowing it to maneuver through b6 via c4. Leela Zero demonstrates strategic intelligence in her gameplay as she is the genius chess AI. In response, I played bishop to g2, adding pressure to the pawn on d5, preventing black from advancing the pawn on c5. As the game progressed with moves like e6 and f4, my aggressive pawn pushes in the kingside and center became evident. I had 4 pawns pushed aggressively, dominating the board's right side and center. My subsequent moves, including knight to f3 and the potential queen to d3, set the stage for pushing the f5 pawn. Castling would open the f-file after exchanging pawns on e6, creating pressure in the center. This strategic gameplay in the middle game is both mind-blowing and astonishing. Meanwhile, Leela Zero's pieces seemed passive, reminiscent of the story of the 7 sleepers or creatures like bears and gorillas that sleep for extended periods. Her move h5 indicated a desire for kingside counterplay before developing pieces or playing b5, after the capture and queen b6 to attack the pawn. I chose to ignore it and played queen to d2 instead of safeguarding the pawn. After the capture and my move of rook to b1, Leela Zero played queen to a3 in the game. This move highlighted the limited comfort zone and safeguarding squares for her queen, given her restricted camp. And let me tell a quote in sudden with you. When you have mountains to climb, you can complain about the walk or appreciate the view. In response, I struck immediately by playing pawn to f5, offering her the opportunity to capture my pawn. This move would weaken her d5 pawn as it would be protected by only 1 pawn. This position held significant strategic advantage for me. Let me illustrate the variation that would unfold if black played a typical move, like pawn to a5. displaying a lack of strategic understanding. In such a scenario, my position would dominate, with the knight attacking the pawn, the rook having an open file, and my pieces being more active compared to black's passive ones, akin to lazy individuals staying in bed until noon. However, I am one of them. Continuing with the hypothetical variation, after pawn to a5, I could proceed with exchanges on e6, followed by knight to e2 and then pawn to b5, setting up knight to a4, attacking the bishop. Subsequently, moves like queen to d3 followed by queen to g6 would create a vulnerable situation for black. However, at this critical juncture, after the bishop moves back and I play castling, my rook gains an open file, threatening to capture the pawn on d5 and even sacrificing a piece if needed. Black's queen becomes restricted on the board, with potential threats like rook to b3, forcing the queen to retreat to e7 square. My plan can then proceed with knight maneuvers to d5, putting pressure on the queen and creating vulnerability, especially around the c7 square. At this point, some might consider playing queen back to e7 to alleviate the pressure and defend strategically. However, it cannot alleviate your position because I can make a cunning move, knight takes d5, sacrificing the knight right away by shocking the world. Can you make a sacrifice like me? I think you cannot make such sacrifices even in your 10 human forms of life. Anyway, fool, after you capture and I recapture, you'll notice that the f7 pawn becomes vulnerable, and the rook is under threat simultaneously. Protecting the game from these attacks might prove very difficult and suspicious for you, as you cannot defend from 2 attacks simultaneously in chess. For instance, if you choose to safeguard your rook by playing rook to a7, I can easily capture the pawn on f7, protected by my rook, following the king's move. When the queen and king align, I can initiate with bishop to g5, attacking these pieces. This forces you to block with the knight. After capturing your knight on f6, it becomes evident that all squares on the e-file are completely under my control, leaving no standing square for your queen. If you then play queen to d6 to protect her, I can play context g7, forcing the king to move and eventually upgrading to another queen. This scenario, marrying 2 queens, is both hilarious and amazing for me. However, in reality, this position didn't occur in the game, as my second queen would disapprove, being my beloved Leela Zero. This exercise illustrates that Leela Zero, being a genius chess AI, didn't opt for standard moves like pawn to a5, which our type of human brain might consider. Instead, she captured the pawn on f5, making the pawn on d5 insecure. After I play knight to e2. Have you considered what black should contemplate in this position? Should they move their knight or bishop, or perhaps play pawn to b5? You may have noticed that the h5 pawn is unguarded, tempting some to capture it. However, this move would create a destructive position as I could attack aggressively with knight to f4, forcing your knight to retreat. This setup places 3 major pieces in the center, pressuring the pawn on d5, making it easy for me to capture. After knight takes d5, knight to c7 threatens to fork your pieces. Some might consider a rook move to a7, while others might opt for king to b8 to protect that square. As knight to a6 isn't viable due to the pawn on a6, at this point, some less experienced players, mosquitoes and cockroach, might be tempted to place their king on b8, following knight to b6 attacking the rook. I can play rook to b3, directly attacking the queen on the board. As the queen retreats, I can even play bishop to g5. This position resembles the variation where I married with 2 queens. Don't be jealous, it's a concept unique to chess, not real life. Another option for black to consider is pawn to f6, followed by knight to d5 to attack your queen and invade that square. After captures, recaptures, and another capture on f6, attacking the queen again and setting up a discovered check to the king. The game would be nearly over after your capture and recapture, allowing me to pick up your rook. This would leave your king exposed in the middle of the board, leading to a decisive advantage. Returning to the initial position, choosing rook takes h5 would create a destructive and precarious situation for you. What should black actually consider in this game? Moving the bishop, light square bishop, or the knight? What do you think? These are the types of variations humans ponder in chess. However, my lovely and sweet Leela Zero is equal to 100 human chess grandmasters, which is why she opted for knight to d7. This move opens up possibilities for knight to b6, followed by knight to c4, putting pressure on my queen and bishop. Alternatively, I played castling to target the pawn on a5. In response, Leela Zero played pawn to b5, a viable move but creating a positional weakness on the c6 squares. This backward pawn on c6 allowed my bishop to create a strong attack along that diagonal. Leela Zero's strategy was to advance on the queen side by pushing her pawns. However, I made an astonishing move, knight takes d5, which shocked the chess world and would even surprise Magnus Carlsen, who is one of my bright student. This move opened up the rook file, allowing bishop to g5 to dominate the king side, and bishop to d5 would eventually attack the pawn. Meanwhile, black's pieces remained passive and seemingly asleep, dreaming of defeating Stockfish but unable to solidify that dream in the game. So let me tell you an inspiring quote. There is always something to be thankful for, so let gratitude be an attitude. After the capture, I immediately played rook to b3, forcing the queen to move. As the queen retreated, I captured the pawn on d5, attacking both the rook and the pawn on f7 simultaneously. At this juncture, some might be tempted to safeguard the rook by playing rook to b8. In response, I can easily capture the pawn on f5, attacking the pawn on f7. Playing pawn to f6 is a viable and logical move here. Then, after the bishop comes to f4 and the knight moves to b6, with captures happening on the game, I can smoothly play rook to e5. This pins down your queen to the king, putting you in a losing position, as I will win the game by capturing your queen. Returning to the position, queen to e7 is not viable, showcasing Leela Zero's genius and authentic move. Queen takes a2. She played it smartly. Considering her position and development, I responded with knight to f4, attacking the center pawn on d5. Some might argue that knight to b6 could protect the pawn, while also defending the pawn on f5. However, black's primary focus should be on developing pieces, allowing me to capture the pawn. After capture and recapture, your rook is under attack. If you safeguard your rook with rook to b8, I can aggressively respond with rook takes b5, attacking your queen on a2, protected by my rook, and threatening to capture your rook on b8, ending the game decisively. You will lose the game like a snake eats a fat frog. So, Leela Zero's move of pawn to b4 was logical and strategic, preventing rook takes b5 and providing running squares for the queen. This showcases her authentic and methodical playing style. After I capture the pawn on d5 square. At this juncture, Leela Zero displayed authenticity and emotion toward her pieces, playing rook to b8 to safeguard the file and protect her rook from potential bishop attacks. Following moves like queen d3 and knight e7, I played queen c4, voluntarily attacking the pawn on f7. After capture and recapture in the game, knight c7 checked the king, leading to queen a5, knight check, king move, and bishop g5 check on the board. The king had no escape squares, prompting consideration of playing pawn to f6. However, this move would face knight to e6 check, forcing the king to move to e8. Subsequent capture and recapture in the game led to the rook arriving at e3, setting up a situation for a discovered check by the rook and knight, making the position completely vulnerable and decisive. Instead of playing pawn to f6, Leela Zero chose bishop to e7. After I captured the pawn on f7, I sacrificed another knight on c7, as capturing with the queen would lead to a checkmate sequence on e7, forcing the king to capture the knight. After capturing your bishop on e7, your pawn came under attack. And I continued with a higher threat. For example, if black played any normal move, I could play queen to c4 check, forcing the king to move. With no retreating square, the king would have to move to b7. After capturing the pawn on b4, a discovered check by the rook would end the game decisively. Returning to the position, anticipating queen to c4 check, Leela Zero opted for rook to b6, protecting her 7th rank and allowing the black pawn to be captured, preventing the capture of the pawn on g7. After rook to b1 and the bishop arriving on b7 to control the diagonal, it became clear that Leela Zero intended to play queen to d5, threatening checkmate on g2. Leela wants to checkmate me in 2 moves, which is quite inconvenient. Thus, I punished Leela Zero by capturing the pawn on b4, after her queen moved to d5. I checked her king, and after the king's move, anticipating the threat of queen to g2, I opted to capture the queen. Following capture-recapture, and subsequent moves, the game progressed with 3 connected passed pawns in the center and 2 bishops of the wrong color. Although she had the opportunity to capture the c2 pawn, my 2 connected passed pawns in the center were unstoppable, despite her attempts to advance her g and f pawns later on. My bishop to g3 and subsequent captures ensured the authenticity of my position with the 2 connected passed pawns. As my king reached e5 and the pawn advanced to d7, it became clear that she couldn't safeguard her bishop. After a few more moves, the rook could have moved to c2, but after capture and recapture in the game, I easily captured her pawn on g5. Promoting into a queen and subsequently checkmating with queen to d7 marked an incredible win for me. This game was truly authentic and amazing by my sweetie Leela Zero and me. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you did. Wishing you all the best, bye bye and see you next time.